What's going on, everyone? Jeremy here from The Quarter. I've got a full day of news for you here. I've also got 4 videos on Midwestly, 2 of which, or 3 of which might be live by the time you see this. So if you want kind of hard politics coverage, make sure you check out Midwestly. I'll leave a link in the pinned comment below. Now, it appears, maybe, that that Hollywood is finally turning on China, or at least the press seems to be. In a brand new report by The Hollywood Reporter and subsequent articles downstream, this article takes a look at, from deal frenzy to decoupling, is the China-Hollywood romance officially over? 5 years after an unprecedented era of frenzied East-West deal-making, cash flow has stopped. Donald Trump's trade battle lingers, censorship is on the rise, human rights issues in the Middle Kingdom have upended business prospects for the U.S. film industry. It's hard to know what's going to happen. Now, in the run-up to Chloe Zhao's historic Best Director win for Nomadland at the 93rd Oscars that 12 people watched, Disney began tiptoeing around potential landmines with its regard to China, the director's home country and the studio's most important international market. Quote, "Please note, in your ongoing coverage of Nomadland, that Chloe Zhao is a Chinese filmmaker." An executive for Disney-owned Searchlight emailed members of the Hollywood press on March 4th. "You may accurately refer to her as Chinese or a Chinese nationalist." Why? Why does that even matter? A number of news outlets, including the New York Times, had mistakenly referred to Zhao as an Asian American, but the bluntness and blanket stage nature of the proviso was conspicuous. As it turns out, Disney had abundant reasons to be concerned over how the provenance and perceived allegiances of its rising stars director, who was also helming the studio's forthcoming $200 million Marvel tentpole, The Eternals, which looks boring, was being portrayed to the world. For months, the studio had been making clandestine efforts to avoid agitating the Chinese Communist Party when it came to Zhao, who was born and raised in Beijing, but attended high school in London and LA and college in Massachusetts and New York. The simple fact is she now lives in California, which is certain to irk the CCP and provoke Chinese notorious internet ultra-nationalists whose MO is to aggressively scrutinize any Chinese artist who achieves significant success in the West, searching for hints of disloyalty to the motherland. Sources say that in the late 2020, a Searchlight publicist persuaded the small New York-based filmmaker magazine to remove a quote from 2013 Zhao profile in which the budding amateur explained the inspiration for her first film, Songs My Brother Taught Me, about Native American teenager looking to escape from tough conditions in South Dakota's Pine Ridge, Indian res. It goes back to when I was a teenager in China, being in a place where there are lies everywhere, she said. You felt like you were never going to be able to get out. Boom! Absolute bombshell. So you have Disney going out and demanding rewriting of history simply to protect that precious China money. Now, this is something that the Hollywood media obviously knew about for the last several years, but only now are they feeling like coming out and saying something about it. A lot of info I received when I was younger was not true, and I became very rebellious towards my family and my background. I went to England suddenly and relearned my history. Studying political science in a liberal arts college was a way for me to figure out what is real. Arm yourself with information and then challenge that too. In most contexts, Zhao's remarks, an ambitious young artist reflecting on the memories of a teenage angst and rebellion that inform her work, would be innocuous. And if it weren't already for the normal for the American film industry, Disney's behavior would be a scandal. The United States' most iconic media brand would going out of its way to preemptively aid an authoritarian government in censoring an artist's interview with an American media outlet. But as it turned out, the studio's efforts were for naught, while its risk assessment was indeed accurate. While the quote has been removed from the filmmaker's website, archived versions were unearthed in China shortly after Zhao's Best Director win at the Golden Globes, setting off a social media backlash and prompted Chinese authorities to cancel the local release of Nomadland in April and expunge most mentions of Zhao from the internet. The controversy reached its zenith when the Oscars were fully censored in China, just as a homegrown hero was capturing the film world's biggest prize. While Zhao has a great many admirers in the Chinese film industry and among local movie buffs, her achievements nearly don't exist to the 1.4 billion people living in China with Chinese internet firewall. The prospect of the Eternals release in China is murky. The CCTV China movie channel recently aired the U.S. release dates in which they skipped both the Eternals and Shang-Chi. Insiders say Chinese regulators were equally upset by the Oscars nomination in the short documentary category for Do Not Split, which chronicles the 2019-2020 protests in Hong Kong against encroaching Chinese authority. This is what we're talking about. Western companies acting on behalf of Chinese CCP censorship. That is exactly what Disney did. By the way, if you're watching this video and you haven't yet subscribed, please do click that red subscribe button down below. I could really use your support. As the U.S. film sector emerges from lockdowns, not to mention the Trump administration's and its aggressive pro-American trade regulation, the Hollywood-China relationship's at a crossroads. The U.S. market share is on a downward trajectory as local fare is finding greater tradition in the Middle Kingdom multiplex than Hollywood imports. Well, yeah, of course. They only watch what they're told to watch. Meanwhile, Hollywood is facing criticism stateside for bending over backwards to appease the authoritarian regime. Amid new climate of direct geopolitical rivalry with China, many analysts believe the U.S. studios will be lucky if they can retain a foothold they once had there, let alone making any meaningful progress towards expanding market access, or a growing revenue. Good. And by the way, stop seeing their movies here, too. They abandoned us. They abandoned the West for that China bucks, and now that that's blown up in their face, don't give in to them. Don't make up. They left us. So remember that. I'm not saying don't watch movies, but I'm saying, there are many ways to watch a movie without supporting Hollywood. At the same time, Hollywood's foothold in the Chinese market appears to be slipping. The reputational risks associated with the realities of doing business there are rapidly on the rise. While U.S. companies are increasingly taking principled stance on social issues ranging from voter disenfranchisement in Georgia to the cases of everything else going on, Hollywood has remained mum when it comes to the Chinese human rights issues. Judd Apatow stood out as the exception when he summed up the state of affairs during a September interview on MSNBC. Instead of us doing business with China that's leading to China being more free, what happened is China has bought our silence with their money. All the while, even more, the most outspoken celebrities have said nothing about the crackdown on pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong or the forced internment of over 1 million of Chinese minority Muslims in the province of Xinjiang. Right? Good. Despite the routine tongue lashings from U.S. politicians, both parties, so far the studios appear to have calculated that they have much more to lose by crossing China's red line. Remember that. Remember that when these companies change their profile photos to pride colors in a week. Remember when they change their avatars to black squares for BLM and you idiots retweet them and think they're woke? This is a major shift. Disney should have the ability to say we won't stand for what's happening in Xinjiang province as a company, says Chris Fenton, the former U.S.-based president of DMG Entertainment, which was an active player in Beijing Boom Period, co-producing Iron Man 3, and they should be able to make that statement without fearing that the theme park's going to get shut down or they're never going to be allowed to sell their IP in that market again. But how that ideal can be realized in a global industry of ruthless realpolitik is anything but clear. Not only that, As well, with all cases of self-censorship, the evidence is most apparent in what's missing in the aggregate. During the decade-plus period in which China has risen to the status of a hegemon in the waiting, with business interests and political influence extending to every corner of the world, the Hollywood studios have not created a single film, big or small, that depicts the country with a whiff of critique or even real-world nuance. Critics, often academics, argue that China has cannily leveraged the market to co-opt Hollywood's global pop culture machine into effectively carrying water for one of the country's most important lines of strategic global messaging, that China's rise as a global superpower is benign or a stabilizing phenomenon. To the suggestion that Hollywood isn't in business with the art of an agenda, critics can take their pick of dozens of films released in recent years, offering direct critiques of the United States' own foreign policy and social justice failures. From Adam McKay's multi-Oscar winning nominee Vice, for example, to the energetic lampooning of George W. Bush presidency, or even Zhao's Nomadland, a sensitive depiction of the consequences of rising income inequality on those who fall into the United States' tattered social safety net. I mean, this is insane. A lot for all fretful hand-wringing over China in the industry today. As recently as just 5 years ago, sentiments were the exact inverse: emphatic optimism. The money is drying up, and I'll leave the rest of this article to you, and you can see Hollywood media turns on Disney, exposes their Chinese agenda. Money's drying up, and now the press, I believe, is seeing the writing on the wall that China is going to start rejecting more and more of this Western knee-bent entertainment. They're going to see Shang-Chi blocked. They're going to see The Eternals blocked, and I'm here for it. And these movies will also tank in the West because there's always a drive to please China with these films. And we remember, let's all remember that Disney actively tried to erase their own employees' pro-free speech statements just to get a taste of that Chinese love batter. So I don't want to hear anything about China or about Disney caring about people or caring about social issues. This is just the first and what I think will be perhaps the beginning of the downfall of the Hollywood-China marriage, and I absolutely am happy about it. I hope you enjoyed this video. We'll talk to you again real soon.